Hey everybody, this is Tinderbox Meetup on Saturday, January 3rd. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox. This coming up is the final weekend of Winterfest, the artisanal software festival at artisanalsoftwarefestival.com. On sale there, you can find Sasha Fast's The Archive. If you don't have a copy yet, consider picking one up at a nice discount. You can get Michael Becker's courses at a nice discount. You can get My Thinking with Tinderbox and save something like 15 bucks. So give that a look. Uh, Also, really interesting today is a column by David Sparks at maxsparky.com on slow thinking, which I think is a movement analogous to slow food, the revolution against fast food. Uh, he calls it solving for meaningfulness. I'll put the link in the comments, but it's worth a look. I think it resonates with some of the things we've been talking about. And here's Michael Becker.
Hey everybody, welcome to 2026. Terribly exciting. Um, and typically on the meetups, what we do is we go around the room and introduce new people. We don't have anyone new today. We then go and delve into any particular topics that people have or a theme. And we don't theoretically have a theme today, but I'd like to propose one. And I would love to see or hear anybody, if anybody has any particular topics that they'd like to discuss. The theme that I like to propose is I'd love to have Dave Rogers talk about his latest incarnation of his best practices, now what he's calling the Hitchhiker's Guide to Tinderbox. And particularly, he's suggested we talk about the concept of the config note a bit. And I think that would be a really useful discussion to kind of kick off the year. I'd also like to see if Jacob has made any progress on the talk we had last week about inventorying things and has found any libraries for like OCRing his book projects and indexing that kind of process. I was going to delve into that myself and hadn't. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. Does anybody, before we put Dave on the hot seat, does anybody have any topics they've been thinking about or working on? Yep, Mr. Bernstein.
Yeah, I had an interesting bug episode yesterday that I think you folks might find amusing. So last weekend, Tom Diaz sent, actually, I think it was over New Year's. Tom Diaz shows up at many meetups, sent a crash report. And so I sat down with Claude, said, "What's up with this crash report? This doesn't look like anything I've seen before." It was a crash in stamp list. And Claude says, "Oh, yeah, I've got this right away. There's a null pointer in the stamp list, you idiot. And you keep doing this." And I pointed out that there could, in fact, be no null pointers in the stamp list because this list doesn't contain any nulls. It contains the objects themselves. And says, "Oh, that was very foolish of me." And we worked on it for a while. And here's what turns out was happening. One processor is busy saving a Tinderbox file on an autosave. And it's doing this on a separate processor, so you can continue using Tinderbox while it's saving this backup of your work. And so it's being polite, and this is perfectly safe. Another processor is responding to an agent update, and the agent is updating with an agent action that renames notes. And one of the notes that it's renaming is, in fact, a stamp note. And so it at the very time that it's working through this list of stamps to save the stamps, uh, another processor is coming along and throwing away all the stamps and rebuilding the list. And this is a recipe for disaster. This saws off the other processor's branch. Now, had I ever sat down and thought that anyone would rename a stamp note in the middle of saving a file? No, because I still am back in 2001, where when you saved, it thought for a minute and then it displayed a nice box with a progress bar that would slowly creep across to show you why you couldn't use your computer anymore. And I'm still in that mindset. So this had never occurred to me. Uh, it also requires really large documents, really large stamp collections to have any realistic chance of happening because this crash is only going to happen if it's writing out the stamp list at the same time you're renaming a stamp. And it never occurred to me that an agent would want to rename a stamp anyway. Uh, so we probably are getting rid of all of the long-standing frequent crashes, but there are bound in the next few months to be some of these idiosyncratic weird crashes that will crop up just from our having large documents and saving them more often, doing other things with them more often. So you know where to send them. That's the news from Lake Wobegon.
Very nice. Roger, you have a
Uh,
comment?
no, no, I chuckled at what Mark said. Sorry, I'll mute myself.
No, all good. All right, who else has any topics that they want to discuss? All right, Dave, you want to walk us through your updated Hitchhiker's Guide and tell us a little bit about your config note comments, thoughts, questions?
Yeah, this could be interesting. My sharing my screen is my kryptonite. Let's see here. So over there and share. All right. So what are you seeing?
Your Tinderbox file.
Awesome. I have a control bar in the middle of it. Do I move that? There we go.
You
Yeah,
can.
I just did. Okay. All right. So and if I make this bigger, does it get bigger for you too?
It
Or it's
does.
probably okay, good. All right. So some weeks back, we had a there during every Tinderbox meetup, not every Tinderbox meetup, but over the course of many years, a lot of different tips have been repeated, and they keep getting repeated because they're useful tips, and they're just not widely known within the community, especially as new members come on board, who new users who have been somewhat successful with Tinderbox and are now trying to um, expand their capabilities, and they're encountering some of these hitches that kind of interfere with achieving success quickly. So I suggested maybe we develop a best practices sort of Tinderbox document, and that met with some positive reception. And like an idiot, I volunteered to do it. So that's it started out the best practices still to know. I'll walk you through the basic thing. The intention is to keep it sort of lighthearted and approachable. This isn't going to be a treatise in computer science. I don't know computer science. I didn't go to a university. I went to a trade school. So you'll have to bear with me.
So that does
Um,
that mean you actually learned how to do stuff instead of
yeah,
wave your
mostly
hand?
mostly drive ships, which has little to do with what we're doing here. So, respecting the route, the overall topic is the Hitchhiker's Guide. Now, one thing that there are many deficiencies in this document, and hopefully over time it will improve. But what ultimately I'd like to do is reflect a lot of the things that we're advocating within the document itself, and we're not anywhere near that yet. So this is just sort of the first broad swath. So trying to get people, comfortable with the document, that it's approachable, that it might be entertaining to explore. I keep things light, so lots of pop culture references. Some of this is informed by my experience with Beagle Brothers on Apple II software back in the 80s. Bert Kersey was a former marketing guy who got out of the marketing business to develop software for the Apple II, and a lot of he bought a, a printing press of some kind, and he printed his own manuals, and they were all illustrated with these 19th century woodcuts. And so I'm throwing them in there. I don't know if they're any value added, but they're entertaining to me.
Hey,
So
Dave, before you move on, I want to make a comment and something you just said, in that you hope that this document embodies, the best practices themselves.
correct.
And that's something I've been trying to do in my trainings now for years. And one of the challenges I found, and I'll use the analogy of the Julia Child cooking show, right? So she shows you how to mix some stuff up, and then, it helps you prepare the thing. And then she sticks it in an oven, and then she pulls another one out that's been fully cooked, that's been there, been doing its cooking in the background for 5 hours. So she's been making like multiple versions of this meal at various stages during that live recording session, so that within the hour you can actually see the entire end-to-end process without the actual 5 or 6 hours of duration time that the actual cooking takes. And I think I want to encourage the community to help us think about how we do this. The challenge with, in my experience of pulling together these kind of evolutionary developments, is you want to be able to show the implementation of the practice in stages.
The worst state.
But if you actually do it by the time you get to the end, when you're like, and now here's the complete thing, there's a lot of those kind of building blocks that you needed to put together in the interim that disappear in the act, that have that have either disappeared or been integrated or disappeared into the, or way gone in the background, and the novice user, or even myself, like 90% of the time, I forget a lot of the code in my files because now they just work. So how do you suggest we navigate those kind of illustrating those interim stages? And that's not just for you, but for the whole community.
Well, I'll just respond to that in the context of this document, and run away. I'm not, that is not the intention here for this document to be a how-to. It's more of here are the things that will help you succeed. It's not a how-to. These are ideas that you need to consider, think about, investigate more deeply. This is designed to make you, hopefully, somewhat excited about using Tinderbox, feeling good about using Tinderbox, and it will get you started. And then the real resource is, of course, the meetups and the forum, which is where you come with your on the ground question, the rubber meets the road question. Now, this is an adjunct. I wouldn't say it's complementary, I think, to your video series, which is much more of a how-to type of product. This is hopefully just an intro with some nuances, and here are some things you definitely want to pay attention to. So let me just finish running through this because I think it's kind of cool. But here's an early version of ATB Ref. I thought Mark Anderson might be here. He'd appreciate that. But I included a link there because he does have an option for making a donation. I haven't found an illustration for the forum yet, but there are links to the forum. There's a link to the backstage sign-up page there. There's a link to Mark's books. Haven't really got much further. The Zoom meetups. There's David Eddy at an early Tinderbox Zoom meetup. And there's a link to the meetup there. There'll be some more verbiage in here to kind of give what to expect in a meetup. This is the YouTube video collections recording link. Then, we often talk about what is it you want your Tinderbox document to do. You have to have a problem you're trying to solve, and that Tinderbox might be the tool to use to solve it. It's like when you have a great hammer, every problem looks like a nail, but that's not always the case. Tinderbox won't replace a spreadsheet, won't replace a database, but certainly doesn't replace a word processor, but it can do many things. And when you need to use parts of all those tools in a Swiss Army knife type of configuration, then all those are here. So begin with the end in mind. I linked to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's semi-pop culture. Then the usual guidance that we use, a consistent naming practice with some verbiage about why you do that to avoid name collisions, and you develop good habits. The respect the root, which again, I'm sort of ambivalent about because you can always, as an outliner, you can just select all and indent, but it is probably good to begin that way. The smart quotes I thought was going to be not really as valuable anymore because we have code notes and everything where straight quotes are default. But then we had a little glitch come up with I don't know. Did that transition to my browser, or no? You're still seeing the Tinderbox.
Yep.
Okay, so let's see if I can go back to Tinderbox. So I just opened up the forum page with the latest pack, or the addition of the package installer that Chuck made from before had a curly quote in it. Tripped him up, which I thought was kind.
And Dave, can we pause there real quick? Here's another, going back to the idiosyncrasies comment that Mark made earlier. I think there's a tendency for us to really get wanting to be using the UI elements like you're showing here. And one of the beautiful things about Tinderbox is there's one way to do something. There's probably 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. And there are several ways for managing turning on and off smart quotes. And to what extent do we want to be explaining those? So for example, this is a great way to do it. Another way to do it is in the file menu. If you go up to file and substitutions, there is a whole list of really quick methods that you can trigger using in the substitution methods for turning off smart quotes, smart links, etc. And then quick stamps is another, using the inspector is another effective way to do that. And then finally, a fourth way I found to be super effective is you create a hotkey that works for you. And then that way, and personally, I find the hotkey particularly useful because hands don't leave the keyboard, you don't need the mouse, and you can flip them on and off really quickly. So yeah, and so in doing a tool like this, are we also explaining the purpose of the distinction between a curly quote and a smart quote, and then explaining how to quickly turn them on and off and why?
No, the essential lesson is turn off smart quotes. But
why is that the essential lesson versus something more?
Because I need to get from here to there in a timely manner. I mean, I cannot rewrite ATB ref in this document, and no one would read it. So the point is to turn off smart quotes. There are many ways to do it. There's value in all of those. There's utility in all of those. But the main point to remember is if you're working in your document and something's going wrong, maybe turn off smart quotes and see what happens. But I hear what you're saying. Again, this is not a how-to. You're right. If there's one way to do something in Tinderbox, there are 10, and that's probably a topic somewhere under general guidance. There's more than one way, and we can comment on that to just way to do something, do anything. And then we'll let, I'll amplify on that because again, we go up here. This was a response to some feedback I got initially that the word best, really triggers some people. And so, I'm not telling anybody that this is the only way or the best way to do anything, but sees it as some of the best things to do. So again, I'm not going to rewrite ATB ref as a user manual. This is an intermediate guide to Tinderbox. It's not a reference manual. It's not a user's guide. It's, I could devote the rest of my life to something that you're describing, and that's not my intention. So go down through all that stuff. Setup now. So setup is another. We're going to get the config note here in a second. Setup is another thing where I think Mark described it as feathering your nest in one of the books or manuals or something. That how you create the environment that you like to work in, which I think is what Jacob achieved with his Markdown highlighter and everything, and that is a virtuoso performance. And I linked to that in this note. And if that's the environment you feel most comfortable in and find most appealing, you can certainly set that up that way. That will give you some inspiration on how to go about it. I think it modeled on IA Writer, which a lot of people really love. So that I thought was important. But again, that's not my how-to. I mean, let's go look at this link and watch it. I was going to say I changed this morning that RTF was handled as a first-class citizen. But there is a notable exception. The Tinderbox will not import RTF. It'll import everything it imports basically is plain text. So if you're thinking you're going to import something and have it be RTF, then it's probably worthwhile to know that you're not going to get that markup from whatever document you're importing. So and then appearance, I wanted some next week maybe. I saw that Mark Anderson just updated a bunch of articles on color and things. This is another area that I'm not qualified to write about with any authority. So I'm going to look at his latest updates to articles. I'll take a stab at it, and then we can talk about it yes, at another meetup. But this was an interesting. This is the config note, and I think it's a value. This is one of the most the first epiphany I had using Tinderbox. And Michael, it was you that introduced it to me. Is that you can use Tinderbox within itself to abstract away a lot of data that you use in many notes and have them all. So I was forever in the blog going through a note and where I'd made an error or something and having to change 53 notes, copy, paste, paste. Had I used something like a config note, make one change within that config note and the whole document is changed. So that was an important, I think, a really important tool that an intermediate Tinderbox user could exploit if they're building a document that can use that. So we had an interesting discussion on the forum where there was a debate, and I guess I misunderstood the original poster's comment about why he thought config file was wrong. And we can talk about that more, but what's a config note? So scientists are unsure. We got wrapped around that we don't have a real rigid definition of one. But the real question is, do I need one? And the unequivocal answer is it depends. So this is the text that basically says that if there are pieces of data in your Tinderbox file that may change at some point in the future, either by design or as a response to something, that if you abstract those pieces of data away into separate notes, then you can change those attributes in one location and have them propagate throughout your document and save yourself a lot of work. And I thought one of the virtues of that is it allows you to make portable Tinderbox documents that can be shared between users. So for instance, Jack Beatty has a blog template that I don't know it's ready to be shared with people, but the way he wrote it is that basically you change the config notes in that document, and you could then publish to any a website or server with the website name and things of that nature, all customized to your purposes while using all his data. I see Roger's hand up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I was looking to make sure you guys could hear me. One thought here is, what's the motivation for a config note? I understand what it is, but I mean, it might be something worth calling out explicitly. It's solving a particular problem. What is that problem? Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, no, that's why I say it's the real question is why do I need one? And then the answer is, of course, it depends. I mean, so many people
So it kind of
uh,
gives you a concise mechanism for managing variation. You know?
that's true. Yep. Yep. I say generally a config node container belongs in a document that's intended to have a long life, something that is used frequently, maintained regularly, and has a degree of structural complexity that is made more manageable by a configuration facility within the document. So, and then presumably I'm hoping to get, a little bit more clarity here and some more examples here. This is the thing that came to my mind at when I first wrote this was a lot of us you're using Claude and Chat GPT and these AI um, services that require API tokens. And you wouldn't necessarily, if you change AI model, all you need to do is change your, I think, API token in there. Now, um, same with weather services or things of that nature. But in Jack Beatty's case, he had all of his file directories, file paths within his local um, computer. I won't say local host, local computer, and then also the relevant data for the server, and that you could just change those values in those notes. And he was using text, dollar text in those notes to contain that. And we had a little discussion offline. He said he thinks he should have used a separate attribute rather than dollar text, but dollar text works. Okay, I see Michael's hand up.
Yeah, so another just on the API comments, especially if you start getting into the world of wanting to share your files with others, storing your API keys in your config file can be uh, problematic because you can easily accidentally forget that they're there and share your file with others, and now you've just opened up your Google Drive and all of your API keys to the world.
So there are some
Another
security issues here to be aware of.
Right. And especially or like when you're screen sharing, you may inadvertently share your API keys with the world. So
Mhm.
the way to circumvent that, and you might want to put the little caveat note in here, is you can create a text file on your computer and then using the run command, have Tinderbox go out and grab the text string from that text file on your computer and then pull that in. So that way the API key is actually independent of the Tinderbox file, and then that allows for the Tinderbox file to be easily shared.
And that also makes sense from the principle of, well, I forget what the name of the principle is now, but essentially, one thing, one place, and it's managed in one place and is accessed from many, as opposed to spreading it out all over Hell's Half Acre.
Yeah, give me a second here.
Yeah. Another possibility, which might be a best practice, would be to, when you have to encode those keys in the document someplace, here's a recommended way to do this. And it's sort of like a config note, but do it this way. It makes it easier for others to understand what you have there and how it's used and so on.
Well, and again, I think I want to elaborate a little bit on the security aspect issue because that's important. But the main idea is that you have information that you would not want to share with other people. And by abstracting it away from the main document into this configuration note, does make it relatively straightforward to just remove that information, sanitize the file, and then share it.
Well, for that, but there may be information that's in the document that doesn't reside or is needed any place else.
True.
Makes sense for it to be in the document. But then you need to be able to handle an easily way of removing that
right,
or redacting that.
Right. We're in violent agreement. Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay. I see Chuck with his hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to sort of amplify that. First of all, I think Dave, you're quite correct, and we were sort of getting into the how-to a little bit here. But the essential point is that if a piece of information is just buried in your document and it's important to you or other people, and it might change over time, then that is the clue that you want to abstract it and put it in a place where it is easily accessible as a document-wide entity. And I think that's really what you're saying here. And it's
Yeah.
that recognition that there's a need to abstract information, even if an API key is used in only one note in one place. You want to draw the user's attention to that kind of thing is important. And it's so important that you might want to bring it out and put it someplace where it's really obvious what it is and how someone else, you included, might change it in the future.
Well,
And I
it
think
just
you
occurred.
made those points. I think the best we can do is come up with more examples to help people think through the abstraction process that's important to making this a practice worth adhering to.
Right. It just occurred to me we're recording this so I can go back and listen to you guys again and then write all this stuff down. You don't have to watch me type. So, all right. So, Michael, you had the media library, media folder, what the media assets?
Yeah. So what I do is, because I don't store images in my Tinderbox file, because at the end of the day, my major intention is to write reports and publish, and I find embedded images don't export in a way that is effective for me producing reports. So what I do is I create a directory on my folder called media, and then I'll have subdirectories within that. And then I will hard code a path so that all of my export templates basically know where to go to get the locally stored media file on the hard drive. So I have so with this media and I break media up into three attributes. It's the primary media directory. So it's media dir for media direct or media
I'm not.
directory.
Don't worry. Just keep talking. I will get it from the recording.
I'm just trying to remember what it is. It's media directory. It's media path, media directory. So media path, media directory, and then media file name. And so media path goes to my main media folder. Media directory is a single is the name of the directory that aka the project where that image file might be, and then the media file name is the file name itself. And by breaking those things up into three paths, I can use the TBX config file as a global set of settings for every note, so that when I'm looking to display the image, 90% of the time the only thing I need to do is change the file name as an attribute in an individual note. But if I want, I can override that and put locally stored directory paths, directories, and file names in a local note, so that local note can disregard the TBX config and find that image anywhere. And that's all tied to the way I'm running my templates.
Okay, you lost me right there at that last section. There are occasions when you don't use the
right, yeah, because let's say sometimes, like 90% of the time, I'll put my blog articles in a directory called media articles. But let's say I'm working on a private project and I don't want to be polluting my images, or it's a confidential project for a client, so I don't want my images for my client in the broad article.
I see. Yeah.
So I have a sub project for that client
within that same document.
Yeah, in that same document, and so in that way I can stick those client images into its own dedicated directory, and then I can just disregard using on ads. I can disregard the TBX config global setting and have that client specific setting set for that particular project in that TBX file, because I will often run until a client project gets big enough. I will do 90% of my work in one or two Tinderbox files. And once a client project gets big enough, I'll migrate it over to its own standalone files.
Okay, that's one approach. I see Chuck's got a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest, I hope this is constructive, that maybe one way to approach this topic of config notes is to start with the need for having a space within your document where you can have shared information or information that is important that you want to be able to access easily, independent of what else is in the document. And in that sense, what we need is we need a place for config notes.
Mm-hmm.
One direct analogy would be every operating system has library directories of all types. I won't get into all the various things they're named, but within the Apple Mac OS, there is a library. There are actually several of them. And what's in there? P-lists. P-lists are the objects that hold information necessary to an Apple application, to the way you use the system, but they are also used by Tinderbox and many other applications as the place where they store the user-specific information. And I think what we in a sense need is in Tinderbox place to put that kind of information, much as we have a place to put hints, prototypes, templates, things like those are all things that are important enough. They've got their own space. And I think what we want to talk about here is the need to establish a space for information that is shared within that document, or that might be used in porting that document to other users. And if we can get that concept across, and I think we've made progress in helping people think through what they want to do.
Right, and again, I will go back through this video and add your thoughts to that overarching note on the config note. But that was one of the interesting parts of the forum discussion, is that apparently the config file has a number of different meanings and contexts, where we may encounter, or where I worry a little bit that we may be admitting some confusion or allowing some confusion, is we have the hints container, and perhaps we should standardize on a config note residing within the hints container, and maybe that becomes a part of the default application. Hints is built into Tinderbox. Where ultimately I was going, not ultimately, but where ultimately I was going to go is to enable the user to create a stationary file for Tinderbox, such that they've identified that they like working in Markdown, they like Jacob's IA markup, whatever their features are, whatever their comfort, their media file directory, all that stuff, save that as a stationary document, and then when they create a new project, all that stuff is automatically populated. They just open that piece of stationery. So, as opposed to perhaps Michael's approach, where he will do many projects within one Tinderbox document, because all of those features are already there for him. You create a separate Tinderbox file for each project, where the structure, the infrastructure, I think this is I don't know who did Backstage, I think that's Jack Beatty came up with that term. Or it may have been from way long ago, where you have these infrastructure notes that support whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Now, again, this is very outline biased. I am not a visual thinker. I'm not a great guy in mapping view. We're going to have another conversation on best practices with regard to using map view and thinking in Tinderbox with map view, and how to be productive in that. I thought the speed dating thing might be a source of inspiration. I don't know. But I agree that it's probably to our benefit, the community and the new users and everything else, that we have a consistent location for this container, and a universal name for it, whether it's TBX config or config note. Should we take a vote here, or any more discussion on that, or am I off base?
I think you're making, reinforcing the point, which is, for this to be effective, there needs to be some consistency within the community as to what we name these things. In my examples that I published. I
Don't get
called it
David Eddy all excited.
I, I called it the document commons. It doesn't matter. And what I did in that case was I set it up so once it got installed, you could name it anything you want. But yet code that expected to have that common place could find it without having to know what its name is. And those are some little tricks that maybe we could try and incorporate into what is more
That
of a
is
how-to description, but getting at
no,
the
it's a key
important point.
insight. That's a
Yeah,
key insight. And then after this, when this goes up on the web, I'll go back and listen to this portion again, and I'll capture that yeah, you're not reinventing the wheel each time you start a new project. That there are
right.
certain things that you use repeatedly. Not everybody's going to do this. Not everybody does a lot of action code. A lot of people are going to be working in map mode, and they need to know how to make adornments work and and a lot of people are really into linking and link analysis, which again, none of this we have approached yet, and I have little competence to write about those topics. This is more along the lines of the things that I'm familiar with, which is producing a blog, which relies on the outline, and Captain's Log, which is just a daily journal note taking app type of thing. So
So the point I was trying to really emphasize is once we know where to put these things, whatever we call them, config notes, we'll come up, we call it a P list. We could call it anything we wanted to. But once we have a common place to put them and consistency in that regard, then we actually we give the users freedom. Now then anybody can go and put any note that captures stuff they want to use in their document in that area, and they will always know where it is. If they have a friend they share the document with, they'll know where it is. So that's the kind of essence of this. And we don't want to put people into a straitjacket saying you have to configure your config notes to look exactly like this. That isn't going to work. What would work is to say, expect to find these kinds of objects that express the details you want to capture in your work in this particular place. And then you and others could leverage that. That's the real essence of what you're getting at here.
yes, and I think what we probably should think about now is some more examples to inspire people. One, I didn't follow the link, but it was fascinating to me, is synchronizing state across multiple notes or something. Does anyone familiar with what that
Oh
role
yeah.
is?
I don't know who put it up and suggested it, but yes, that's something that's a problem I know I deal with in my world. But in general, you might want to have a series of notes that can be used in one form in one context and then in another form in another context, so that you have the state determines which way they're going to be used. And I think some of Michael's work includes a lot of, for example, when you enter certain text streams into your writing, he's got action code that picks that up and then goes and automatically generates things. But then he's got equivalent config notes that say how those actions get applied. And so by changing that one thing, he can affect a whole bunch of operations within his environment that would otherwise be very tedious to change. And so
Okay,
I think that's a good example of that kind of technique.
that
And
may
I think
be
that's where state would be used as a way of describing things.
that may be a topic more advanced than the kind of reader I'm anticipating here. Yeah, I, so
So one thing I hear you doing, Dave, which I find interesting, is and one thing I particularly struggled as I've kind of tried to share the Tinderbox stuff is I'll often get a lot of feedback of what you're doing is really interesting, but I don't care about marketing, or I don't care about business, or I don't care about X, Y, and Z. And I think one of the best practices, if you will, or part of the don't panic thing that it would be good to try to convey here is to help encourage people to look beyond the immediate context of the story that's being told and to look at the function that's behind it and see how it would apply to you. Right. So for, and like Bruce and I would go back and forth like that a lot. He'd say, well, I don't do marketing. So what you're showing me is not important to me. But then eventually he'd go, well, but wait a minute, that set of methods I could actually apply over here and it would really work for me. So how do we convey that idea to people that they should be looking for? I don't know the words to put around it. Looking for the essence, not the context.
Well, yeah, you can't really prompt people to grok the insight. I mean, you got to hope for the best. And so what my comment to Chuck on my feedback to Chuck on the synchronizing state across multiple nodes, that seems to me like a bridge too far kind of thing for a document of this nature, that you know we won't lose anybody. This is a lightweight type of reading thing. This is not like they're gonna fall asleep
I
on
agree
the.
with you. I was just merely trying to provide an example of where that might come into play.
Well, and I
But
certainly appreciate that. Yeah, because now I understand what he was talking about. Whereas before I was like, I don't even know what that means. I'm not sure I know much more about what it means, but I do know that it's probably not appropriate for what I'm trying to do here. But where
Dave, I'm on that. Let me stop you there too. I may mention this to you before as well. That idea that you don't need to know much more than what it means, other than if you do it, it solves your problem.
well, and that's true, and that's
Maybe
true,
that's
and
another insight too. You can figure out how it works later. It's just if it works, it works.
well, and again, the idea here is to kind of give you the idea of what this thing does, and maybe you see how it relates to your document right now. Maybe you don't. Maybe sometime 6 months down the road, you go back to it and you go, oh, I can use that here. If you ever look at this document again, and the links to the videos and the libraries. For many of these things, I'll put examples. There are many examples within the forum of discussions of these types of issues that I can link to that will help facilitate that light bulb going off where it may apply to their particular problem. But again, for a lot of people, they really need to understand what it is they're trying to achieve and how Tinderbox facilitates that. And I think I mentioned this a couple meetups ago. It seemed, and I'm probably wrong or incomplete, certainly incomplete, that it seems like there are three kind of main targets or groups of Tinderbox users. There are people who produce reports and publish weblogs that are kind of output directed. There are people who like thinking in a visual environment and exploring relationships and network analysis through links and things. And those are the people who feel most at home in the map view. And then there was a third one that I can't recall right now. Maybe that was the link analysis people, which again, they are more interested in what links, what connects to what, and what the feedbacks are and things of that nature. They all have.
I think a fourth category is people like me who are looking to publish stuff.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You're output directed, you're production directed. That you have and in fact, your production is different. Because you rely on LaTeX and Pandoc and those sorts of functions that produce camera ready copy for a publisher somewhere. Whereas I just put out HTML and throw it up on a static HTML and put it up on a web page. So, and how it looks is how it looks. And nobody critiques me on it. So I don't have to meet the Chicago standard and stuff. But people who do have to meet the Chicago standard, that kind of stuff matters to them. So, and I don't know how much of that I need to reflect in here, only that you can do it. And here are some examples of how. But is there anything else on the config note where that springs immediately to mind? I know.
Yeah. I mean, another one I use all the time is like basic elements that I have in my config note are author's name, today, date calculations. So I have my config note calculating today's date, yesterday's date, tomorrow's date, first start of last week, start of next week, and I use those date calculations for my project management planning and my to-do list planning. And so that way I don't have to have every note calculating dates. I only have one note calculating dates. Then every other note that may need a date, like what's the start of next week, knows where to go look it up.
Okay.
And then that creates and so another purpose of the config note is if you have any universal calculations that need to be made, you have the config note doing it. And so then that would reduce the processing power on the computer.
Just
Okay.
an interjection here. I think Dave's on the right track here by saying the best way to handle this topic is provide a lot of examples. And so the
Mhm.
example you just cited, Michael, is a good example, and we've got other examples that we can refer to. And I think by pointing people at some examples and a richer variety of examples, we're going to more likely say somebody's going to see something. Oh, I know what that example is talking about. Let me go see what they did. And that's probably where the learning and insights will occur is when they see how someone else did it and how they might apply that same principle to what they're doing. But trying to describe it in great depth, I mean, I don't know
Right.
anybody who's ever really managed to describe, how you develop config files for computing systems because it's just such a varied topic. It goes all over the place. But I
Right.
think
Mhm.
here you can make progress by just getting people to recognize the issue, the need for a common place to put these things, which is the big insight of operating systems in the first place. I mean, it's why there's an etc directory in Unix and all Unixes ever since. So that concept can be established, but then reinforce it, give people the tools to understand it by providing examples. And I think you're right on track. That's the way to do it. And I think it's what makes this whole best practices or Hitchhiker's Guide valuable is that you're creating a place to get people to explore and think about practices they could use.
Right.
That's and that
So in
and
other words,
this.
grab your towel and your universal translator and go.
Well, that's the thing too is that now it occurs to me that yeah, we are sort of taking a walk through the landscape of Tinderbox and all the abilities that it affords, and pointing out the best features and showing them the sites, and then it's up to them if they want to come back and spend 3 weeks and really dig into it.
Right.
But
Yeah.
Mark Bernstein, do you have any feedback on what we're doing
Yeah.
so far?
Yes, I'm not muted. Amazing. One thing I've been thinking is that uh, suppose you're working on a big project that's due on November 15th, and so you may need to know various contexts, how many days are left in the project. But management being what it is, that due date might change. And if you scatter that in lots of places on the assumption that it isn't going to change, you're going to find stuff that's just wrong and out of date when the date inevitably does change. So, again, a config note that contains this information is easy to refer to whenever you need it. And then you don't have the problem when the due date changes. All sorts of policy things, tax rates, um, due dates, currency
Exchange rate.
conversions.
Exchange rates is another good one. Like if you commonly work with euros or pounds and you need exchange rates, having the config file maintain that for you too is a good one.
And you can pull that exchange rate from using a get thing, right? You could, well,
You
that's a
could.
how-to.
You can
That's a
either
how-to.
manually do it or you can pull it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, you would pull it in a config note. And then, your logic would be wherever the node is to make the calculation.
Right.
Now on that point though, Dave, but again, this is where it gets interesting, right? So you could pull it and overwrite the file if you don't care about history. If you care about history, and this is the beauty of Tinderbox, you could have Tinderbox grab the exchange rate you have in the file right now, have action code create a historical archive of the date and the rate of that date, and then give you the current one. So then you can actually maintain history so that if you ever need to go back to see what it was back, a year ago, you have every time you updated the exchange rates for your calculations, you've got a historical record of that.
Right.
So that you leverage action code potentially to help you do that.
Yeah. And again, you wouldn't necessarily see me know all this. I'll when we go back through the video, I'll
And
explore
then before we
that.
forget, Dave, one other common one I use is because I've learned too to intermix HTML, Markdown, and other flavors of text processing in my notes. Sometimes I'll have 3 or 4 text processors happening in a single note for some stupid arcane reasons, but they need to be there. When that happens, I'll use the text of the config note as a placeholder holding page. So what I'll do is I'll have a local note, take the markdown, stick that into the text note of the config file as processed HTML, and then once the template's done doing its thing, it will then go copy that text and paste it back into the output. So the text file, the config text, the text field of the config node is also a temporary holding place for calculations and text processing for me. And that will be something that's more advanced. Yeah, clipboard is a better word for it. It's a really great temporary clipboard.
Okay. Well, I will put that in there, and then maybe we'll find a video where you did that once, and we'll link to it.
Yep.
So where are we at in time? We're 1 o'clock.
Got a half an hour. We got a lot of time.
Yeah. I'm kind of running out of gas on the config note thing. I mean, so I'm opening the discussion up to anything. Yes, Chuck, go ahead.
All right, I'm going to step into the sticky stuff, as they say. I want to express some concerns with your consistent naming practice guidance.
Okay.
I know there are a lot of people who really like that guidance. However, I'm going to come right out and say I think it's bogus. One of the reasons why that kind of technique has emerged is there are lots of examples of computer systems that are awkward to work with and never factored in how to describe the, and I'll use the word attributes of the things that you're working with in the context of that. Could be an accounting program, it could be a database, could be, you just pick your application. However, Tinderbox is one of the very few examples of a very consistent, very organized system that always knows what the contextual information associated with a note is at any point in time and gives us lots of context to work with. Hence, putting in codes into the names of notes is, in a sense, undoing or putting in parallel, doing the same thing that Tinderbox is already doing, which can lead to the problem of somebody having a precursor or a prefix to a note, which they forget to change, and then think it's a prototype or a template when it's no longer. Or they can have a template, and because it didn't get the right prefix, they don't think it's a template or a prototype or a piece of action code or what have you. Whereas if we got people to look at the tools and the contextual information that is built into Tinderbox and is core to everything in Tinderbox, then I think we're giving people much better advice on how to manage those notes that have particular characteristics, whether they be adornments, templates, prototypes, functions, you name it. And they're already taken care of. So I think that it's misguidance to suggest to people that naming a prototype beginning with a P is going to help them. It really doesn't, and it may actually lead to more problems. If you are very consistent and you are very meticulous in your naming conventions, you can get away with it. But not everybody's going to be meticulous and as careful as, let's say, Michael is with the naming convention. And so as a result, I think people are much better advised to stick with the basics that are built into Tinderbox and that are really very powerful and very flexible and survive over time far better. So how many times have prototypes changed over the history of Tinderbox? Quite a lot. How many times have templates changed around? Quite a lot. But yet having this consistent mechanism for knowing what's a node, what node is a prototype, what's a template, and having ways to reference that, given the information that is inherent in the system, is a much better way of working with Tinderbox. So I just want to throw out that I think that bit of advice needs to be put on a back burner somewhere.
I want to
know
challenge
Michael,
that.
you're going to really inject
I'm going to challenge that because one is and part of the reason why I started doing it was naming collision. So I had a note
naming collision is a bogus problem because first of all, the English language has so many homonyms in it. That we're always getting tripped up by them.
No, but my point
computer systems have so many
naming collision for Tinderbox for find. So the find features in Tinderbox, so you go finding notes. If you have a note named to do,
yeah,
and it's to do, and you're running find, which to do are you talking about? Are you talking about the prototype to do, the template to do?
If I'm looking for the prototype to do, that's what I'm going to use.
But the point is, if you do Command F and do a find, Tinderbox pops up a find list, and if you're looking for the word to do, it just gives you 3 notes named to do. You don't know which of the 3 notes that is.
It's very easy.
Is it your prototype? Is it your template? Is it a product? Is it a service?
I would argue that if you want to make that kind of visibility, do something that you also do a lot of, and that's put a badge on it to make if it's important to you to be able to see.
The badge doesn't show up in the Find UI.
Well,
the badge shows up in map view. It shows up in outline. It doesn't show up in Find.
Okay. I would still argue that it is dangerous to give people advice that is going to take them away from using the tool the most effective way possible.
Well, I think David's got his hand up, but I think I hear where you're coming from, Chuck, and I agree with you. But I think that this is the Hitchhiker's Guide, and a lot of hitchhikers are poets, and they don't necessarily appreciate the texture of Tinderbox in terms of distinguishing one note from another. All they see is a name, and I'm with Michael on this. Is that you can have a function to do, you can have the template to do, you can have all the above, and to distinguish those things because they're all related to the to do whatever concept. But how do you tell at a glance which one is which? Now they all exist in different containers, but adding an F or a P or a T doesn't seem to that like it's the kind of thing that is going to seriously impede anybody from being successful with Tinderbox in the near term. But I'm happy to entertain. Let's go to David first, and then Jacob.
All I can say is, wow. I don't think I've ever brought this up before, but I would draw a line between the naming that Mark Bernstein and inside the technical tool where he is the master. That's one kind of naming. I would try to advocate, and I don't think I brought it up here before, is consistent names for the business, the names of the business things you are trying to address, which is separate from Tinderbox. Tinderbox is just a hammer. Very good hammer, matter of fact. But anyway, so I'm not disagreeing with Chuck at all. But it doesn't come, how to be consistent, which is obviously not a strength of English, with, what do I call it? Postal code, zip code, or postcode? How do I know they're the same thing?
Yeah. So
Jacob,
to that point, there's just as much confusion with alternate names. And again, I think that the rigor that Tinderbox already provides is the starting place. If somebody wants to come along with their own naming conventions, either for business purposes or for any of the other things, that makes sense, and it will make sense to them. But I think we need to draw the distinction between a guidance that says you need to name every note with some kind of prefix to tell you what it is a distraction. And I think it keeps cropping up, and I think it needs to be
Well,
thought
these
through
notes are
carefully.
definitely, these notes are specific. I mean, they're not just like in general the data notes. These are notes that provide some utility to the document exclusive of the data. A prototype note is a model for other notes, and I'm obviously that, but I mean, it's not like you're going to confuse. You're going to give a specific name to a blog, a naming convention. Like every blog post that I write isn't preceded with a B for blog post because I know they're
Right.
blog posts. I mean, so
Right.
but I do need to know that the prototype of the blog post is the prototype the photo prototype, or is it and that P thing helps sort that out. But Jacob, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've happened upon our tabs versus spaces discussion in the Tinderbox community here, so this is great. Um, so thanks, Chuck. No, I guess I'll just kind of riff on what Chuck said just for a minute. Like, I think my, I guess, opinion is because Tinderbox already provides containers for many of these, prototypes, code, stamps, all that sort of stuff. It seems like prefixing notes or designating what those things are using a prefix is just more work. And quite frankly, like I use Markdown. You all know this. You've seen my work throughout my Tinderbox files, and I know that anything in the find, for instance, Michael, anything related to my configuration regarding Markdown is going to be at the bottom of the list because the find uses outline view to order the find results, right? So I'm just of the opinion that Tinderbox already provides pretty good
All right.
conventions. We should encourage people to use those.
All right,
Does
Bob,
the guy?
let me interrupt. Let me interrupt. So
Sure.
here's a great example of why I started using prefixes, and it could be very related to the type of work I do. I do a lot of industry analysis, and you have a company called 1Password. You've got a product called 1Password. You could in your industry analysis, you may have classifications of notes that by their definition have the exact same word. And so when you're using them, are you looking for the product 1Password? Are you looking for the company 1Password? Are you looking for the configuration file 1Password? Having that distinction for particular types of work can be incredibly helpful for agents, for action code, for searching, for find functions. I'm not saying it's universally applied everywhere, but there are contexts where it really matters when you're wanting to effectively manage large volumes of research and output.
But Michael, what you're suggesting is not an issue that is already covered by the underpinnings of Tinderbox. You're talking about a problem space that you're dealing with in your work. And in that context, if you want to have a way of distinguishing a company from a product name, that makes complete sense.
Correct.
That is totally different from telling people you need to start out by using Tinderbox and putting prefixes on things that Tinderbox already well defines.
Again, this is where the nuance matters when it comes into your particular project or context.
Well, I go back to the beatnik and the sandals. I mean, the guy who doesn't have a degree in computer science, I think the prefix is a crutch and it's helpful, and let's give the guy a crutch, but why, how is it toxic? How does it it may, they will not go on to greatness in the computer science world, but because they will be hobbled because they learned basic. That's my problem. But anyway,
so my
Roger.
problem with that, Dave, is that in every respect, I find this nerdy and a turnoff to the people we're trying to get to use Tinderbox. oh, I've got to go thinking through. I got to put the prefixes in, and how many prefixes? What kinds of prefix?
Well, that's
People will get
valuable
agitated
fee
with
that's
trying to
valuable
do something they
feedback.
don't need to do.
That's valuable feedback. I will take that into consideration. I can make this a little bit more ease people into this very easily. They don't have to use prefixes if it troubles them. It's all okay. I'll put a funny picture in there.
Okay.
You got go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, just some observations here. The prefixes, for example, P on prototype, T for template, well, they don't have to be those particular prefixes, but the point is like using a common prefix to essentially establish as a namespace. It's a part of the infrastructure of the document as opposed to part of the content of the document. Uh, I find it useful at times to be able to tell that what I'm looking at is a prototype without having to do anything beyond seeing the name. All right. Now, of course, you could use a display attribute to automatically put a P in front of or T in front of it, so on and so forth. But the use of those things is to designate a role within the infrastructure. The thing, and that's useful. At least it's useful for me with Tinderbox. Uh, this is all convention, right? And what Jacob said, he talked about I forgot exactly what you said, but it shows up at the bottom of the document or the
Outline
client
order.
list. Yeah, outline
Outline
order, because
order.
it's down at the bottom. Of course, that is a convention only, and it's a weak one in the sense that somebody could easily reorder that, not realizing that they're changing some of the familiarity of using the tool. That is to say, now that prototype does not appear at the bottom of the list, because outline orders changed. And that's a consideration. All these are things that we're doing just to make it easier to manage. I like the clear separation between infrastructure of the document versus the content of the document. That's all.
Can we get the developer to weigh in here?
Sorry.
You're muted. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm better. Uh, I suspect Chuck both have antibodies against uh, Hungarian notation, which is the particular prefix style we're talking about here, because it was imposed from a particularly noxious form of Microsoft onto virtually everyone for a few years. And it really did not achieve the goals it was supposedly achieving. I prefer more legible naming conventions of like a to do,
Wasilko.
yep, a to do template, create to do function, um, process to do another function. But it's really just up to personal taste. Uh, Mark Anderson and I go around and around on the utility of acronyms. Some people just love acronyms. I review papers where they just cannot wait for an entire sentence to start defining acronyms for very easy to say and write things, just to have more acronyms. And I don't particularly like them. Uh, yes, David Eddy, it's Simeone with an I, but you've got the right guy. But for people who are not brought up in this era and this tradition, the vehemence of people's tastes in things like language and especially these naming conventions can seem quite peculiar, I admit. But
But are we giving people bad advice by recommending is a prefix particularly disadvantageous to the intermediate Tinderbox user?
I don't think it's disadvantageous in itself. It's going to alienate a certain number of people. I think that my intuition about how many is wrong. because I suspect that these wars have pretty much been settled and our side won. But that maybe that's not the case. Uh,
Well, again, I'm going to put some additional text in
yeah,
here that makes this much softer, and kind of describes who the audience is intended for this particular use of a consistent naming practice. I mean, if you've got a degree in computer science, skip this page, So,
and I think Michael's point about disambiguating names is something to bear in mind. Whether you do that with a prefix, the way Michael does it, or with a suffix, the way Wikipedia does it, or in other ways, by just disambiguating through path.
Well, it kind of matters when context matters or role matters, right?
Uh,
That's why people have come to these things,
yeah.
and not just computer scientists. There's a whole slew of us that grew up without ever having a computer science degree. I didn't get my computer science degrees until I've been a developer for over 10 years.
well, okay, if you're a developer, a programmer, again, this is
No.
my thought is poets.
Well, also too, there's another thing to keep in mind too, which is a tinderbox consideration in that if you're actively using preview or export and you're in a container and in that container you have a file with the same name, you have multiple files with the same name, the tinderbox preview or export will always default to the first item in the list with that same name unless you've come up with some different mechanics to address that.
Okay, Michael, that's a different practice issue for people to pay attention to. That's the problem of how your actions, whether automated or not automated, will be affected by outline order. And pointing out some practices for dealing with and taking advantage of outline order would be useful. I don't think it's relevant to the current discussion we're having.
Well, it is though, because it's relevant to how you name your files. And it's relevant to how you name not just the display name of the file, but actually the export name of the file. So naming, to David Eddie's point, naming's important. And my point being is you don't necessarily need to consider these things on day one. I certainly didn't.
Well,
But
if you're
at
having
some
name
point,
collisions,
you may need to recognize that you will need some refactoring, possibly significant refactoring, once you start hitting these issues. And just being aware of that is a good thing.
if you're having name collisions, prefixing is a way to eliminate those if they bother you or cause you problems.
Yeah.
Yep.
Otherwise, don't use them.
Yeah.
And I think the issue here is what advice do you want to give to someone who's starting out with Tinderbox? And telling them up front that they need to use some arcane computer sciencey naming convention when they develop a template or a prototype, I think is a misdirection.
Point taken, Chuck. Point taken.
That's
But
all
it's not going to be prescriptive. I mean, it's going to be here's something to take into consideration, and depending on your level of comfort or familiarity. I'll make it softer. It won't be as prescriptive, and hopefully won't. This was essentially a lot of the same reaction, just the use of the word best. And you really don't know when you're going to touch a raw nerve with somebody.
Again,
Agreed.
tabs and spaces.
Yeah. Well, you guys, you markdown guys, fetishists. I do not grok you at all.
Well, there's that
whatever.
too. There's that.
I
too.
mean, here's Steve Jobs auditing a calligraphy course, inventing the Mac. We develop a computer powerful enough to render all this beautiful text, but by God, we want our plain text back, and that's all we want to work with.
Yeah, but by the way, I challenge that a little bit. The difference between writing the text and having it displayed. Markdown allows you to write beautifully.
I know. I hear.
And the other significant thing about Markdown is you can read it and get the gist of it without having to interpret tags. That was one of the original intents behind Markdown. The other thing we all love it for is because it's text, plain text. We can work with plain text, and not only that, it's regular plain text, so it's easy to parse and so on and so forth. But Dave, you don't have these needs, so ignore them.
I do. Yeah. In fact, it ain't plain text unless it's ASCII, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, when you can spoof a web browser with these bizarre, construction URL constructions using that 5,000 letter Unicode environment
Yeah.
we have now. I mean, that's no longer plain text. That's chaos. But whatever.
Well,
Well,
plain text being readable by a human, might
yeah.
be a good.
Well, it is readable, but the glyphs look alike. You can't tell them there are, a micron difference. So anyway, I think we've exhausted. I know.
Well,
I know there's a sore spot there. So
one last point here is what you're describing is kind of what I alluded to earlier when I said something. We're doing this as a convention. We're doing it to overcome the problem of name collisions. All right. So you might soften this by saying that in Tinderbox, name collisions are possible. And a lot of times, maybe most of the time, it's not a problem. But if you do find it being a problem, you could consider using prefixes. For example, ...
Yep. It just points out the valuable that name, dollar name, is perhaps the most valuable attribute in Tinderbox, maybe dollar text. But am I wrong about that?
I agree with you in that order.
Yeah. So I love Tinderbox and many other people do too. And sometimes it can be a little hard to get your arms around it and everything. But I think with a little patience and persistence, you can kind of come to an accommodation with it. So that's all I've got today. I think, I'm gonna go home and lick my wounds.
This is awesome. Thank you.
Dave, don't take my comments as being
I am
negative.
not at all.
I think you're doing a great service here. I think this is an issue that just needed to surface. And
No, I'm glad.
I guess it was the person who was just speaking. I'm not sure exactly what you're saying. Roger was just talking. He's making a valuable point. Name collisions can occur. Name collisions occur in our language. They occur in our writings. They're all over the place. They can occur in Tinderbox. Here are the issues you may encounter with name collisions. Here are some of the ways you can deal with them. Point people to using attributes as a way of distinguishing things that have the same name. Also, talk about, how names are found and the importance of outline order and how you might run into problems with that or how you could leverage it in terms of the way you structure your documents. All those things would be very useful from a guidance perspective. And you're well on the way to establishing that foundation, and I think it's worth all of us contributing and helping you out with it.
No, and I appreciate it. I'm being facetious here, but that was valuable feedback from the sense that I don't want to alienate anybody in the audience. I don't, So if there are people that I'm now aware have that point of view, that sensitivity, I can certainly couch this in much less provocative terms. So unintentionally provocative.
You always were a troublemaker, Dave. I can tell that.
And I wasn't able to follow the chat, so I hope do we save these automatically?
I save them. Yeah, I keep them if you want.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
they're generally made available.
Oh, good.
And you can save them. They now provide a little button for
the three.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah,
3 ellipses at the top and says save, so it's really useful.
I got it. Thanks. All right, I'm going to mute my mic now. We were both recovering from the flu here. I avoided a coughing fit during this whole thing, so that was amazing.
Good for you.
Over to you, Michael.
We're basically done. We've got about 6 minutes left. Anybody else have any final comments, thoughts, ideas, suggestions for the end of our first 2026 meetup? If not, we can let us go, and we will see you next week.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody.
Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.